Sí. El siguiente conferenciante es Daniel Denecke, que es director del Best Practices of the Council of Graduate Schools en Estados Unidos. Hizo el programa de doctorado en la Johns Hopkins University, que es una de las punteras en Estados Unidos, y ha estado también ligado a otras distintas universidades que son también de referencia internacional, como la University of Maryland, College Park and Georgetown University. Es coautor de distintas publicaciones y, desde luego, él ha discutido y se ha ocupado de los distintos factores institucionales que pueden contribuir a que los estudiantes de distintos programas los completen en los años previstos. Este es un tema de suma importancia en Estados Unidos. A él se dedican muchos estudios y son algo que todavía aquí parece que no nos preocupa demasiado, pero desde luego en el tema de los indicadores de la importancia de las universidades, este es un tema central. Es decir, que los estudiantes que toman un camino determinado sean capaces de acabar sus estudios en los términos previstos. Bueno, como digo, él ha participado en distintos programas a nivel de Estados Unidos en este tipo de cuestiones y es un especialista. Yo creo que nos va a aportar mucha información sobre estos temas, que son complejos a la vez que interesantes para todos nosotros. Gracias.
Okay. No.
Lo que haremos es las preguntas para los dos conferenciantes las haremos después.
Okay, before I begin, I just want to make one comment about the presentation. Now, everybody who needs translation has audio devices, or how will this work? I'm afraid I'm bound to speaking in English, so for those of you who may need access to the audio recording after, I apologize. The information in this presentation has been updated since what you have in your printed packets. So please, if you're going to cite any data, cite the data from this presentation and not from the printed material in your packets, which has older data. I first want to thank the hosts of this event for this very gracious invitation. I'm sorry, again, that I'm script bound, but I'm reading a text in order to facilitate the translation of this talk. I'm honored to represent the United States perspective on the topic of mobility among such an important group of leaders shaping Spain's future through higher education and policy. The talk I'm going to give imagines three kinds of audiences, all of whom must be involved to create the opportunities we want for young researchers. I begin with background information that everyone should consider regarding the future opportunities for enhanced transatlantic mobility. Then I'll provide some information for young scholars considering research opportunities in the U.S. And then we'll conclude by describing some programmatic efforts among our member universities and international partners. Much of my presentation will have data and information that I won't be talking about, that I will be sort of brushing over, so please feel free to ask me about this afterwards if you have any questions. The Council of Graduate Schools is the only organization in the United States whose exclusive mission is the improvement and advancement of graduate education. The universities that are members award virtually all of the doctoral degrees in the U.S. and approximately 80% of the master's degrees in the country. We pursue our mission through three avenues, and that's advocacy, research, and best practices. In the area of advocacy, we track legislative issues for members, build recognition among legislators for the importance of graduate education. In the area of research, we conduct annual surveys on graduate student enrollment in degrees and on international student admissions, applications, and enrollment. And in the area of my responsibility, best practices, CGS identifies major issues of pressing interest to the graduate community, defines national projects around these issues, and administers competitive grants to our member universities to come up with innovative solutions to address those problems, and then we document and promote those solutions throughout our membership. The Times, and I'm going to mention another world ranking of universities, the Times Higher Education Supplements World Ranking recently added global university, quote unquote, to its set of criteria. Well, it's not exactly clear how this term is defined. The inclusion sends an important message that while universities may pursue international collaborations for a variety of reasons, that quality is one among those reasons. That is, to enhance the quality of your programs. And increasingly, international collaboration is being perceived not only as a way to maximize your economic opportunities, but also as a sign of quality. But overall, I think the fact that many more universities are positioning themselves explicitly as global actors will create more opportunities for international scholars. Now, first I want to talk about the context of opportunity. I'm going to sort of address concrete opportunities in a moment, but I want to talk about the background or the context for opportunity. International scholars comprise an important, this goes without saying, comprises an important part of the U.S. research enterprise. The previous speaker sort of mentioned some statistics bearing that out. Our recent graduate enrollment and degrees data show that almost half of the students in engineering in U.S. graduate programs are international students. International students make up 40% of students in the physical sciences, and 1/3 of U.S. Nobel Prizes were won by foreign-born scientists. Allow me to go back. Oh, no, okay. While most of the indicators, such as those, point in the direction of a more mobile future and a more hospitable climate for international scholars seeking opportunities in the U.S., the picture is not entirely rosy. Recent events have made it clear that there are forces beyond the control of talented students and committed university leaders. So I first want to briefly address the context for opportunity in the U.S. And these are a number of trends that are unequivocally positive. In addition to the evidence of increased student mobility, there is evidence of increased collaboration between universities to partner on joint and dual degree programs, especially dual degree programs, where an international experience is integral to the student's curricular experience and scholarship. The Bologna process and the resulting degree structures and credit transfer mechanisms, diploma supplements, and other clarifying tools are all gaining recognition and acceptance in the United States. And as we come to see the increasing globalization of scholarship and research in both academic and non-academic contexts, universities are focusing to a greater degree than before on global citizenship and the specific sets of skills that students need, scholars need, to thrive in an international context. But sometimes what look like positive trends have more equivocal causes and effects. Although the U.S. government body that tracks labor statistics predicts faster growth in post-secondary teaching jobs, much of this increase will be in part-time positions. In some fields where part-time faculty are becoming especially prevalent, the postdoctoral fellowship is emerging to solve a legitimacy problem as a kind of halfway point between the security of a faculty appointment and the short-term financial commitment that part-time makes possible for the institution. As part-time positions increase, undergraduate degree completion rates are falling. And this is happening at the same time that there's increasing pressure on universities to be accountable for their outcomes and their results, especially in the area of degree completion. While the strong presence of international students in science and engineering fields is widely recognized as a good thing, it's also a sign that our domestic talent is falling short in these critical areas. And while most in the higher education community agree with the global trajectory for greater collaboration and enhanced student and researcher mobility, there are other voices in the public sphere calling for tighter controls on immigration that may impact the flow of talent in the near future, and that play into some of the broader concerns or currents of protectionism, and I would even say provincialism. At the same time, as the previous speaker mentioned, other countries are ramping up their capacity and their interest in retaining and attracting not only their own talent, but talent from around the world. Just to illustrate the importance of international scholars and the decreasing participation of U.S. domestic students, this slide shows global science and engineering doctoral degree production. As you can see, the United States has been increasing production at a relatively steady rate over time, but has been surpassed certainly by Europe. And I apologize for the limited representation of Europe here in Germany and the UK, but our data expert informs me that the National Science Foundation database upon which we're building this does not have comparable data for the major producing countries across Europe. And so in order to show this trend data, we've included the largest producing countries. But certainly Europe has surpassed the United States in doctoral production, especially with the expanded definition of Europe. And Asian countries, especially India and China, have surpassed U.S. doctoral degree production around 2001, 2002. But the real story for us, or the most frightening story, is not the numbers game, that is to say which regions are producing more students, but this next line, which shows the decreasing percentage share of U.S. citizens who are pursuing doctoral degrees in science and engineering. This, just 5 years ago, was a cause for concern. Now I think it's a cause for alarm. That is the sort of severe lack of interest among our domestic population in these degrees, which accounts for our increasing dependence upon international students in these fields. One of the questions that we had after, as Dr. Carmelo mentioned, the events of September 11th, 2001, was would this event and the subsequent restrictions on visa controls impact international student admissions? We have since conducted a survey on the topic of international student admissions in 3 phases in order to better understand student mobility through the United States. The first phase is applications, international student applications to U.S. graduate programs. The second phase is admissions, that is those students who are formally accepted into programs. And the third phase is enrollment, those students who actually show up on day one. In addition to this questionnaire, we also at the same time ask some pressing or hot issues questions on issues such as the 3-year bachelor's degree, especially those coming out of the Bologna process, and universities' policies of acceptance of that degree, international outreach activities among our members, and the question of joint and dual degree programs with international collaborators. The highlights from the most recent international student application survey are that the total growth for last year was 3%, but most of this growth was accounted for by the top 50 universities with respect to heavy concentrations of international students. And I should just point out that although this represents respondents to the survey, the greatest portion of the top 50 responded, of the top 50 with respect to international students enrolled, responded to the survey. Excuse me. Now, I want to briefly look at academic opportunities for faculty, that is, those researchers who are aspiring to faculty career paths in the United States. As you can see here, for all fields, and the same pattern holds when you look at science and engineering fields, while the percentage of U.S. citizens, U.S. born, has actually declined over the past almost decade, the percentage of citizens born outside the U.S. and non-citizens in full-time faculty positions has grown between 1992 and 2003. Those full-time positions include assistant, associate, and full professor ranks listed here. There are also, as I mentioned, non-tenure track part-time and full-time positions, as well as postdoctoral fellowships and traineeships who may or may not have teaching responsibilities. The previous speaker mentioned comparative salary statistics, and this is one of the slides that has been updated since this new data was posted just last month. These are the latest data on salary ranges in US dollars corresponding to the various positions I just mentioned. As you can see, these ranges vary among doctoral, research-intensive universities, master's universities, and bachelor's or four-year liberal arts college. This survey also found that private universities, this is not represented here, but private universities offered higher pay scales than public universities. The tenure and promotion process in the United States is somewhat enigmatic, as there are both what we would call spoken expectations and unspoken expectations, or spoken written requirements and unspoken expectations. But particularly in research universities, as you would expect, publication is the key to successful promotion. The emphasis on the quality of teaching, which is expected of all faculty, and the other commitments, such as service commitments, work on committees, etc., in this process varies depending on the type of institution mentioned in the previous slide. More universities are making gestures in the direction of emphasizing the quality of publications over the quantity of publications and citations. But the fact is that this is still an area, or still a kind of continual challenge for universities trying to move in that direction. Quantity remains one of the important indicators in the tenure process. Now, obviously you can't make out the detail in the text on this slide. But I just want to point out sort of three key positions. The starting point, which is, I guess you'd say, punta de empezar, is foreign national is hired into a tenure track position. The finish line is appoint or convert to tenure track position. And the important point to make is that all paths from the starting point to the finish line must pass through this at the upper right, which is extraordinary ability or outstanding professor researcher. And although the text of most of this slide is illegible, I show this is an example from the University of Hawaii to illustrate two things. And the first is the complexity of the immigration process for international students entering the faculty pathway. But the second and more comforting point is the fact that universities are sort of strongly involved in this process. And I would call them the kind of Ariadne in the thread of Ariadne's thread in the labyrinth of the immigration process for international faculty. Okay, now I'll briefly mention some academic opportunities for postdoctoral researchers in the United States. As you may know, the main federal agencies or government agencies supporting postdoctoral fellowships are the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. The key postdoctoral fellowships from these two agencies are typically have citizenship restrictions. And what that means is a large portion of international students on postdoctoral fellowships receive those fellowships through universities, through private foundations, especially in the life sciences, through libraries and research organizations. And these are available. Particularly common are opportunities without citizenship restrictions in the second set of funders, that is to say universities, private foundations, libraries, and other research associations. I list this link, this website here, not because it's necessarily the best out there, but it's one fairly comprehensive source of postdoctoral information for students, researchers in the biosciences, and it's just to convey that there's so much information out there on postdoctoral opportunities that's best conveyed. Oh, and finally, and I think many of your countries in Europe are experiencing a dilemma, which is to say with postdoctoral or what are called contract research staff, the dilemma is that universities are kind of caught between looking at these positions as employees and as workers, and looking at them, on the other hand, as a population that still needs educational opportunities and training opportunities for their future careers. And so the advantage of considering them as employees is that they receive benefits on a par with faculty who are working at the universities. The advantage, of course, to considering them as students or trainees is that they have access to the university's educational facilities and resources. Visa class was mentioned in the previous presentation. These are the two main types of visas that international scholars in the United States obtain. The first, most common for postdoctoral fellowships, is the J1, or exchange visitor visa. And the key point that I want to make about this position is that family or spouses of those on J1 visas are eligible for employment authorization. They're eligible to work in the United States, which is not the case for scholars on H1B visas, which are most common among faculty, but are also available to some postdocs, particularly those in that employee category. And I won't walk through all of these resources, but for those of you who are interested in pursuing opportunities in more depth, here are a set of national resources that provide a fairly collectively provide a fairly comprehensive picture of academic pathways in the United States. And now, briefly, I just want to mention sort of non-academic opportunities in the United States. This statement, the importance of foreign-born scientists and engineers, continues to grow, is borne out in the previous presentation's data, and comes from the National Science Foundation's Science and Engineering Indicators of this year. The 3 bullet points, the 3 bullet points here show that international workers comprise an even larger portion of the non-academic workforce than they do comprise a portion of the faculty. That is to say, there are more opportunities in the non-academic workforce. This also comes from the National Science Foundation's S&E indicators, and this statement shows that the internationalization or multinationalization of employers, including corporations, but also foundations, is creating opportunities for international researchers. One way of looking at the data on this slide is to see this as the third wave of what we call offshoring, which is to say, after manufacturing, the export of manufacturing, after the export of the service sector, the next sector to be exported is the research sector. But I think another key development driving this trend is the recognition that international problems, for example, in energy, health, and the environment, require international teams of investigators and researchers and international talent. And finally, I want to conclude with a few notes about how universities are working to enhance opportunities for young international scholars. In 2006 and 2007, the Council of Graduate Schools, in partnership with the European University Association, held 2 major meetings of strategic leaders in graduate education, including rectors from across Europe and graduate deans from the United States. Rectors are the primary members of the EUA, and graduate deans are the primary representatives of the universities for the Council of Graduate Schools. The most recent meeting took place in Banff, Canada, and one concrete product that emerged from that meeting was a set of consensus points or principles that they believed should shape a future platform for international collaboration on graduate education. I highlight just 2 of these in my final comments as 2 ways in which we are working to help position our universities as global universities, and thus also working to enhance opportunities for international scholars. This CGS survey data, which is from one of those hot topics questionnaires that I mentioned earlier, shows the percentage of institutions among respondents who had dual and joint degree programs. As you can see, among those with the heaviest concentrations of international students, dual and double degrees were far more common than joint, or what are called double badged degrees, where a student receives one diploma with two insignias. And many of those universities also have exchange opportunities or exchange programs and certificate programs that are not necessarily formal degree structures. The key sort of fields in which these are most prevalent are business and engineering, and to some extent social sciences, and most of these are master's programs, with the exception of the life sciences, where they're more prevalent among doctoral programs. We also believe that this is a growing area of activity, and are currently exploring with our members, both domestic members and our international partners, possibilities for best practices in both the development and the sustainability of these programs. One of the issues that comes up is, despite the complexity of getting these started, once you get them started, they don't always necessarily survive. And so how to sustain these programs is as important as effective development. And then finally, as I mentioned, CGS supports a number of best practice initiatives. The longest standing of such initiatives is the Preparing Future Faculty Program, or the PFF program. And here the main problem that these programs were trying to address was the fact that there was a mismatch between the doctoral students' experience in their doctoral programs and the career opportunities that they would eventually have. That is to say, for the most part, they were being prepared at what the Carnegie Carnegie Foundation calls Research 1 universities. That is to say, research-intensive universities. But oftentimes they would find themselves obtaining career paths at master's universities, at liberal arts colleges, at minority-serving institutions. And they were not prepared for the variety of responsibilities or the balance, the shifting of the balance of responsibilities between teaching, research, and service. And so one of the things that this program was trying to do was expose students to the variety of institutions and their expectations through institutional collaborations, but also to really prepare them for the full gamut of responsibilities that faculty have in any faculty position. And increasingly in these programs, as they've evolved, one of the components has been how to prepare international students in these programs, as well as prepare domestic students who may be interested in collaborating in international environments. And there are a number of other, this is a program sponsored by the Council of Graduate Schools, but there are other reform initiatives that have been very influential in the United States in shaping faculty development across the country. And so those are listed at the bottom of the slide. In terms of best practice programs that specifically address researchers aspiring to non-academic careers, one that I briefly want to mention is the professional master's degree. In some sense, this kind of took the model of the Preparing Future Faculty program and said, instead of partnerships between research institutions and other types of academic institutions, we want to build partnerships between research institutions and employers, non-academic employers, including business, government, nonprofits. And one of the core features of this type of program is that students, although students have the core research experience, curricular experience of traditional masters, they receive an internship experience at their potential employer or at a potential employer. And the main problem that this program is trying to address is the fact that master's degrees are too often seen as just en route degrees that you achieve as a result of striving for the PhD. And what we know in looking at where students go after their master's degrees is that many students are actually taking their master's degrees with the intention of pursuing non-academic careers. And so again, they're not being prepared for the careers that they're ultimately pursuing. We're trying to create better match between the degree structures and their career aspirations. And at the bottom of the slide are two more exploratory best practice initiatives. That is to say, they're not fully in development yet. Preparing future professionals would explore in the doctoral programs those components that might best suit students who are aspiring to non-academic careers. And there's a lot of discussion right now on more formal entrepreneurship programs within graduate school. They wouldn't be degree programs per se, but they would supplement degree programs by trying to answer the question, how can innovation be taught, and is innovation teachable? And I think in the entrepreneurship area, we're kind of back where we were 10 years ago with preparing future faculty with the question, is pedagogy teachable? Is good teaching and mentoring teachable? And I think we've come a long way in that area, but we're sort of just beginning to ask this question in the area of entrepreneurship. Things like risk-taking and risk management, but also things like moving your research as an individual researcher, moving your research into the applied area, idea to initial public offering is one of the components of this program. And then finally, building on the broader global conversations that I mentioned earlier that took place at Salzburg in 2007 and in Banff in 2008, we're now moving with our international partners to more focused meetings that specifically look at some of the pressing best practice issues or some of the pressing issues that we're facing, particularly as we engage in these joint and dual degree partnerships and exchange programs. And one of the foremost issues that's come up again and again, both domestically with respect to the training of international students and the preparation of international students, but also in the area of collaboration, is research ethics. And so the first meeting that will take place in Florence in 2008 will be a small group focused on the complexities and the issues of incorporating research ethics and dealing with research ethics issues in international collaboration. And then the next meeting we're exploring is a meeting that would focus on graduate education and workforce partnerships. With that, I'll conclude, but I just want to make one kind of final comment, which is that one of the questions we often ask is why are universities driving so vigorously toward international collaborations when the immediate self-interest is not always readily apparent? And I think there are some easy answers to this. The first one is to know the competition. That is, keep your competition closer and you have a better chance of competing. The second one is understanding that graduate education and research is not a zero-sum game. That is to say, the benefits of mobility redound to both the sending countries and the receiving countries in ways that cannot be easily explained within a closed border approach to return on educational investment. But I also think that the global university ideal is attractive because we are all recognizing that competitiveness depends upon collaboration, and because we are becoming more comfortable with something that has just recently caused many of us discomfort and even concern. And I think this, what I'm calling this new comfort level with uncertainty, was borne out in some of the earlier comments of all the speakers. That uncertainty that global identity inevitably entails. As we move in this direction, older priorities of predictability and control of talent flow give way to new priorities of pursuing the boundless opportunities that collaboration between and among global universities makes possible. So, thank you.
Después de estas dos magníficas conferencias, me imagino que, bueno, pues habrá muchas preguntas. Tenemos unos 20 minutos, calculo, para así recuperamos un poco de tiempo. Entonces voy a dar la palabra a los asistentes, a ver que, por favor, indiquen a quién se dirigen y nada, sí, aquí una pregunta.
Muchas gracias. Mi nombre es Emilio Muñoz y en este momento, por situación personal, estoy en muchas instituciones. Entonces, estoy en el Consejo, también en CIEMAT y también colaborando con esta escuela, intentando desarrollar una cátedra de ética y valores. Pero vamos, esto es como afiliación. Mi comentario, pregunta, va en primer lugar dirigida a Joan Comella, a quien le agradezco la presentación. Y quería subrayar un dato que él ha puesto de relieve, que es la relevancia y la importancia que tiene ICREA. Es decir, de hecho, voy a referirme a un caso personal. A mí me han pedido hace 7 u 8 meses un artículo que me dieron el título obligado. Es para una revista que han editado Alfonso González Hermoso de Mendoza y Patricio Morcillo, Madrid +D. El número acaba de aparecer y me pidieron a pie forzado que yo escribiera qué políticas para la excelencia. Es decir, yo no tuve que hacer ninguna propuesta. Y entonces lo que yo he escrito es esencialmente reflejar ICREA. He dicho políticas para excelencia en política científica. He dicho que eran 2 elementos básicos, que es capital humano e infraestructuras, y tienen que estar absolutamente ligados, y todo tiene que estar presidido por la flexibilidad. Es decir, yo no he dicho en el artículo que me había inspirado ICREA, pero de hecho es ICREA, vamos, quiero decir, es algo próximo a ICREA. Y eso es algo que desgraciadamente en el país cuesta, porque luego cuando se ha intentado implantar en algún otro sitio, las dificultades han sido muy grandes. Creo que ahora el País Vasco está iniciando con el Ikerbasc como ejemplo, pero cuando por unas circunstancias se intentó implantar a nivel Estado, o a nivel nacional, o a nivel de España, ha habido enormes dificultades. Entonces, es decir, esto es un punto que quiero subrayar, porque quiero decir que ahí ha habido una coincidencia. Otro punto que me ha parecido muy importante de lo que ha comentado Joan, bueno, no voy a hablar del tema de gobernanza porque eso hablaremos dentro de poco, mucho más en algunos encuentros, pero bueno, es el tema de la importancia de lo legal y de la administración. También como experiencia personal, uno de mis mejores y mayores recuerdos de mi estancia en la Universidad estadounidense donde estuve, New York University, School of Medicine o Medical Center, fue el que en el departamento en el que estuve había una persona que era lo que llamaríamos gerente en sentido amplio, administrador en sentido amplio, de cuyo nombre no se me ha olvidado, y de esto hace 40 años, Mr. Luis Garmais, que te suministraba absolutamente la solución de todos los problemas que tenían que ver con tu actividad en relación con la sociedad. Por lo tanto, tú tenías que trabajar esencialmente porque había una persona, insisto, me acuerdo del nombre y quiero rendir este homenaje a una persona que no recordar a la gente, el departamento de microbiología y los departamentos lo tenían. Es decir, este hecho es absolutamente básico. Aquí también, desgraciadamente, eso no se produce. Y entonces, bueno, esto es un problema. Gracias.
Sí, muchas gracias. Yo no sé si Joan quiere comentar algo o Daniel.
Yo agradezco los comentarios de Emilio, especialmente los de ICREA. Insisto en que si se quiere hablar de ICREA es una de mis pasiones. Pero sí me gustaría añadir en la segunda parte un tema que yo creo que es particularmente espinoso, y es la poca receptividad por parte de la Administración Central a flexibilizar el tema inmigratorio. Y ese es un error, claramente es un error. Y, digamos, o sea, lo digo en el sentido de que efectivamente en las instituciones puede haber personas que se dediquen a facilitar la vida, digamos, a los investigadores no nacionales. Pero yo os puedo asegurar que con esto no es suficiente. Con esto no es suficiente. Y como se decía antes, y si se me permite la broma, las facilidades que tienen los profesionales dedicados a darle al balón, pues ya nos gustaría facilidades fiscales, facilidades de... Aquí no tenemos premios Nobel, pero tenemos bastantes jugadores en activo que son balones de oro. Bueno, los países apuestan por lo que apuestan, ¿no? Y digamos que esa visión cultural de apostar por unas determinadas cosas y no otras es lo que realmente tenemos que cambiar si nos creemos que nuestro futuro pasa por una economía basada en el conocimiento. Y este es un problema muy, muy grave. Y no está directamente relacionado con el Ministerio de Ciencia, para decirlo así. Está relacionado con otros ministerios.
Very, very briefly, I'm not sure what the title of the person that you acknowledged at New York University was, but there are two positions that can be very helpful to international scholars. One is sort of a representative in an international office, exclusively devoted to international students and scholars and researchers. Another, we believe, is the graduate dean. And the graduate dean's priority is often to make things as easy as possible for domestic and international scholars by working directly with legislators, as you're doing here today, but working as directly as possible with legislators to send the message about the needs of the graduate community, including the international community, as well as trying to work on those factors that are outside of the control of the university, including restrictive immigration policies, that are impacting in the long term the country's competitiveness and ability to solve the most pressing problems. So we believe the graduate dean is another one of those figures that can be very helpful to international scholars and should be considered a resource for those in the United States.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Sí, sí.
Sí, gracias. Mi nombre es Antonio García, trabajo en la Consejería de Sanidad de Madrid. Yo quería hacer un comentario acerca del dato que han aportado los dos ponentes sobre los salarios. Yo creo que el salario es muy importante, influye en la decisión de que un investigador vaya a un país o a otro, pero también hay que tener en cuenta el poder de compra. Hay que corregirlo. Yo recuerdo un informe del profesor Porter, el que analiza la capacidad que tiene el estado de Massachusetts para atraer investigadores y tiene en cuenta factores como, por ejemplo, el precio de la vivienda y otros factores como, por ejemplo, el aeropuerto, porque los investigadores son personas que viajan mucho y les interesa tener también un aeropuerto. O sea, en realidad influyen muchas cosas, ¿no? Y luego una pregunta. Para atraer investigadores españoles que están en Estados Unidos o en Reino Unido, ¿no habría que también pensar que el entorno que tengan aquí debe ser parecido al que tienen allí? Me explico. Allí, investigadores como Joan Massagué han declarado que no se vienen a España sencillamente porque aquí cualquier investigador mediocre puede conseguir un proyecto o una financiación. Eso lo declaró en El País, no recuerdo exactamente la cita. Aquí los investigadores son funcionarios o empleados públicos. ¿Cómo encaja un profesional en un esquema libre de mercado con un departamento en el cual todos son funcionarios? ¿Cómo se puede encajar esas dos? Por ejemplo, ¿podría jugar Ronaldinho en el Barcelona si el resto de jugadores fueran funcionarios?
Bueno, gracias por la intervención provocadora. Sí, no, en la primera parte, cuando los datos se corrigen por coste a la vida, varían, pero poco. Es decir, el salario, o sea, si se tiene en cuenta todo, además, o sea, por ejemplo, una diferencia importante en Estados Unidos es el tema sanitario, ¿no? La sanidad es privada, aquí la sanidad es pública. Es decir, esto a veces no lo contamos y es un tema muy importante como retribución encubierta, entre comillas, en el buen sentido de la palabra, lo de encubierta, o por ejemplo, el tema de las jubilaciones. Las jubilaciones, aunque sean quizás escasas, aquí son públicas, en muchos otros países son privadas, ¿no? Respecto al segundo comentario y también en relación con ICREA, hasta donde yo sé, es el único programa que recluta investigadores en el que se remunera los resultados, no el puesto. Esto es otro camino que nos queda mucho por recorrer. Aquí se remunera esencialmente el puesto, el tener un puesto de catedrático, titular, y eso es una remuneración. El variable por el ejercicio de tener ese puesto es marginal. En la universidad todos sabemos el tema de los sexenios de investigación que de alguna forma acercan a, digamos, a la remuneración al variable por ejercicio es marginal respecto al salario global. Bueno, yo creo, es decir, es una cuestión de querer ver, ¿no? Es decir, no, yo no creo que podamos alegar ignorancia. Ojalá pudiésemos alegar ignorancia. Es que no sabemos cómo se hace esto. No, sí sabemos cómo hacerlo. Es decir, la otra cosa es que queramos o podamos o sí, hacerlo, ¿no? Este es para mí es el drama. Y esto depende, como digo, de muchísimas cosas que eso sí nos tomaría bastante tiempo analizar, ¿eh? Sociales, políticas, etcétera. Pero que sabemos cómo hacerlo sin duda. Y aunque solo sea por imitación de buenas prácticas de países de nuestro entorno.
I think that there could be debates endlessly about whether students are rational economic actors. That is to say, do they make their choices about where to study in terms of the economic impact, either short-term or long-term? But the important, and we could say that the falling dollar and the tanking of our real estate market has made things actually a little more attractive for international students in theory if they were working as short-term rational economic actors. But the fact that the point that you made in your question and the fact that the issue that I want to sort of emphasize is the importance of selling your cultural strengths, the strengths that you mentioned, your environmental strengths, that because researchers are really looking for the opportunities that will follow from the degree and the supportive research culture and environment that they'll have during their stay. And so, one of the things that I think the consolidation of a kind of European identity through the mobility priorities is making possible is an easier sell about the attraction of staying in Europe and pursuing those possibilities here.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Bueno, pues como tenemos tiempo, de todos modos, yo tenía un montón de preguntas apuntadas, ya voy a hacer alguna, yo voy a aprovechar mi turno, ¿no? Joan me va a perdonar porque es posible que lo veamos más a él. Aquí voy a dirigir las preguntas a Daniel. Yo tengo interés, son preguntas muy cortas. Una de las cosas, a mí me ha sorprendido que desde una persona que viene de Estados Unidos se haya referido al proceso de Bolonia. Porque bueno, digo, me ha sorprendido porque aquí es un proceso casi desconocido y encima si nos viene alguien de Estados Unidos y lo comenta, me ha sorprendido más. Entonces, aunque ya sé que Europa pinta muy poco en Estados Unidos en el ámbito de la universidad, mi pregunta sería ¿cómo se ve el proceso de Bolonia desde Estados Unidos en lo que se pueda ver? Quiero decir, si es algo que hace Europa más atractivo o no. Esta es una pregunta y voy a hacer todas las preguntas, ¿no? La segunda pregunta se refiere a un comentario que ha hecho él también sobre la carrera académica de los profesores, que ha calificado de enigmática en Estados Unidos. Claro, yo no sé cómo la podríamos calificar aquí. Después de oír esa palabra, a mí me resulta realmente difícil calificar la carrera aquí, ¿no? Pero no es precisamente eso que habla él de carrera enigmática, no responde precisamente a lo que es el rasgo esencial del sistema de Estados Unidos, del sistema universitario, que es la enorme flexibilidad. Claro, si es la flexibilidad tan grande que permite que las universidades tengan una autonomía enorme a la hora de contratar, probablemente las referencias son más o menos comunes, pero claro, luego se puede caer en eso que llama, en eso que ha denominado él de carrera enigmática, ¿no? Quizás es mucho más enigmática la carrera aquí, pero bueno, esto es un comentario sin más y me gustaría, si él tiene un momento, pues que pueda decir algo, ¿no? Y tengo un enorme interés sobre otro tema que él no ha tocado, pero que yo creo que tiene que saber de esto. Vamos a ver, en España en estos momentos estamos en un proceso en el que se intenta valorar cada vez más, y las autonomías lo hacen, valorar cada vez más la carrera académica desde el punto de vista de los méritos de los profesores, méritos en investigación, méritos en docencia. Bueno, se ha referido al sistema de los sexenios, que es un sistema que depende del ministerio, pero se intenta incidir más en este tema, ¿no? Mi pregunta es, La discusión siempre se pone sobre la mesa en el sentido de que hay que valorar tanto los méritos de investigación, que son los más fáciles de valorar, como los de docencia. La pregunta es, ¿existe algún sistema en Estados Unidos que sea capaz de valorar los méritos de docencia y que no se refiera solo a la asistencia a cursos, claro, de distinto tipo? Esas son las tres preguntas, ¿no? Y son muy complicadas.
Very good questions. The answer to the first one, I think, is that the immediate reaction and response to the Bologna process and the need for information, hunger for information, was caused by a kind of crisis, a feeling of crisis, that suddenly in the year that these 3-year degrees would start appearing on our shores, we wouldn't know what to do, and that universities may have policies, university-wide policies against accepting 3-year bachelor's degrees. And so the immediate curiosity about the Bologna process is, what are we going to do? Are we going to, is all of Europe going to shift to a 3-year bachelor's degree, and how will that impact our acceptance of European? So there's been much greater clarity about the differences in degree structures among signatory countries to the Bologna process. But the conversation has really evolved now beyond the kind of issue of 3-year acceptance policies to a much greater interest in how longer term the Bologna process is going to pan out in terms of the aspirations, also echoed in the Lisbon priorities, to create a kind of European identity or a European free flow of talent that would render Europe the actually most competitive region in the world. And the interest, I think, in the United States is now looking at the longer term priorities and how organizations such as the European University Association and others that are evolving now at different levels will be supporting those priorities through best practices, and we're very eager to engage in the best practice conversations that will evolve. In response to the second question, the specific enigma that I mentioned is the tenure and promotion process, and I guess the quality of the aspect of the process that I think is most enigmatic is what we would call politics, not politics grand scale, which is to say, sort of ministerial politics or who you know in the government, but departmental politics and university politics, so that there are occasions when there are scholars with more objective criteria for tenure who do not receive tenure, and other scholars who do not have such a long resume or CV who do. There are other factors that come into play, and we're not always comfortable talking about what those other factors are, but the fact is they do come into play. And what we've been supportive of is at least universities and graduate deans creating informal forums or fora for students to be able to talk to their peers, and before the faculty pathway, for young faculty to be able to address what some of these unspoken criteria might be, so that they can best prepare their case for tenure. And that kind of leads into the third question, which is to say, universities right now, the leading universities in the country are talking about moving away from the most traditional measures of merit, which have been scholarly publication, and toward a more comprehensive, more inclusive evaluation of faculty performance, inclusive of teaching, but also inclusive of mentoring, which is not necessarily formal classroom teaching, but are you shepherding your students through to degree completion? Are they successful in their careers after completion? And how much of that is a faculty member really responsible for? And these conversations are not always happening. My sense is that they're not happening right now at the level of formal categorization in the tenure and promotion process. They are happening in this other area, which we call best practices, which is to say, universities and graduate deans are providing rewards and recognition structures that parallel may not be integrated within the tenure and promotion process per se, but that provide formal recognition for outstanding mentoring, for outstanding teaching. And the hope is that by creating this parallel culture within which universities are conferring formal recognition on excellence in these other areas, the ability to weave these into the formal tenure and promotion process will be sort of, the wheels will be greased for that.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Pues si no hay más preguntas, tenemos aproximadamente 25 minutos para tomar el café. Pueden salir por estas escaleras hacia abajo y recuerdo que a las 12 en punto comienza la siguiente sesión. Muchas gracias.